Hello and welcome to Lightmap from SIFTER. My name is Adam Christou and thanks for joining me on this week's episode. Lightmap is a program where we have conversations with game creators and developers. We ask them what it takes to make video games and interactive media and the challenges that they might face along the way. It's a guide to interesting new gameplay experiences. In every episode, you get to meet developers, artists, musicians, researchers, and more. Our guests on Lightmap this week, we've got two of them, which I'm really excited about. Anders Kyle Groningsader, and did I pronounce that right? I think I got it wrong.
You were close enough.
Thank you. and André Read of Wheeled Interactive, who have put together a really awesome game called The Fertile Crescent, which has just popped into early access. We're going to have a chat with them about The Fertile Crescent just after this.
If you like insightful discussions about those high-profile games that everyone's talking about, then why not check out SIFTER's other podcast, Mainstream, in your podcast feed right now. We talk about those high-profile titles, those AAAs, some of those other smaller indie darlings, featuring insights from the award-winning SIFTER team and other special guests. You can find Mainstream in your podcast player. That's on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or head to the SIFTER website, that's sifter.com.au.
So The Fertile Crescent is a brand new RTS game that's just gone into early access from development team Wheeled Interactive. If you're a fan of RTS games like Age of Empires, you might immediately see some similarities on a visual level, but The Fertile Crescent actually draws from a variety of different elements, including 4X and city building games, to create a fascinating spin on classic systems seen in the RTS genre. I'm joined now by Anders and Andre. I'm really excited to talk about The Fertile Crescent. I've had a little bit of time to play around with the game, and I'm just kind of really excited about like a homegrown indie RTS title. And so I guess the very first question is, where did this idea spring from? Why an RTS, and why an RTS set in the Bronze Age in the Middle East?
Since I kind of started thinking about this project decades ago, since probably was a kid, and since I played the first Age of Empires demo and saw someone play it over LAN party, it was like really memories that still stick. And I just have always loved RTS games. It's been my favorite genre. And then at some point the genre was declared a little bit dead by some of the big publishers. There were fewer successful RTS games, but I've always wanted to make one. So I did. I was a software engineer and worked on educational games for about 10 years before I jumped into this. And also, I have an interest in ancient history, especially like far back, even like the Stone Age, but up until the Bronze Ages, I find it a very interesting time period. So I kind of merged those two interests together, so to speak.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mention a background in educational games, because when I think of like historical RTS games like Age of Empires, I almost think about that sort of like we are doing an educational history game in its core. It's kind of teaching you about like different historical factions, different wars that happened. So how did it lead you to the Fertile Crescent as a location and a place?
First, it's kind of, I would say that history is not been shown much in movies or games. I remember Troy with Brad Pitt. That was a really cool movie, one of the best fighting scenes. And that movie took place in that area. But there's not so, or at least when I started developing this game, there wasn't so many games set in the Bronze Age specifically. There has been a few games since then being actually about this era a bit more. Like you have the new Troy Total War game. So there's a little bit, but I still think it's a time and place that we can explore more.
Because I'm sort of interested in, like, when I think about like a time period, I wonder how much research gets done to help you build like the bedrock of the basic design elements and sort of mechanics that you're going to build your game from. Did you find that through the research process you were like, here's something that I can make into something really cool that will fit into this game, that you think maybe probably wouldn't exist if you hadn't landed on the Fertile Crescent as a location?
Yeah, 100%. So a lot of the game mechanics. So I had the, I wanted to make an RTS, so there's some basics that need to be there, like how you order villagers to chop wood and stuff like that. But actually, I didn't look so much to other games for what I wanted to make. I read history books, and I was actually more inspired by the history books and how basically the rise and fall of civilizations. And it kept coming back to the kind of rise of agriculture when we started cultivating food on a large scale, and how the first city-states came to be, and also how they totally collapsed at the end of the Bronze Age, and we don't really know why. We have all these theories. Can be like there's like all these different reasons, but the interesting thing is that was one of the few times where trade was truly globalized. Like it was a globalized world like we have today, and it totally collapsed. So maybe we can learn something.
Not at all an ominous thought going into climate change in the next couple of decades.
Exactly.
I really like that idea of, the tension of food, being like such an important part of this game. It sort of weaved itself into so many elements of how the game works. I think the most important one at the beginning is like the fertility of land and locations, in terms of where you establish a village and how it grows and how it builds. Tell me a little bit about how that sort of came about, and particularly as well, I guess the automatic worker generation system that's sort of come about in this game, because I think a staple of the RTS genre is trying to figure out how workers work within this system, and you've got like your sort of StarCraft type games where you kind of just build endless workers almost up to you've got like 40 or 50 and you just stick them on lots of mines. Then you've got other games where it's sort of like they sort of just kind of pile up after a while. Like I find with Age of Empires, I don't know what I'm doing with my workers after a certain point. So how did you approach all of that in this game?
Yeah, so the automatic villager generation was part of our thought to streamline a few aspects of RTS games. They can have a bit of a high learning curve, and there's lots of things to do. And we want game to be more about making good choices. And in almost all RTS games, having more workers means you have more workers to gather resources. You have a better economy. So very often it doesn't make sense to not just keep making villagers, but it's kind of like a muscle memory thing. And if you forget to make villagers, or you have 40 food but not 50, and then you have to wait until you can click that one button to get that villager, etc. But it's I don't know, it's didn't feel like a meaningful choice because it's something you always have to do no matter what. So we decided, okay, let's just make it automatic, but then tie it into some interesting mechanics. So, for example, a little bit inspired by history, that if you have a surplus of food, you have more babies surviving, healthier population, so to speak, and your population can grow a little bit faster. So it's both our wish to streamline a bit, and also to tie it in with some of the historical aspects of the game that we're inspired by.
Yeah, and I imagine likewise on the other end of it, starvation is not really a zone that you want to be in with your civilization. So it does seem that there's a lot of negative detriments to if you're not paying attention to your food on that end of the scale too.
Yes. Yeah. So we wanted, because in most RTS games, you gather resources and then you build up an army, and then you can just sit there. There's no consequence of having a large army. So basically, the largest army will win often. But of course, throughout history, having an army was expensive, and it came with a consequence. They have to be fed and paid. So we wanted that to be part of the game, that food is something you always need to gather, because it's always you always have to pay and feed people. So it became an integral part of the game.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of like if we're gonna like boil down the essentials of the RTS genre, it feels like supply/food is like one of those things that is like a resource that is almost in all of them. But what I like about the Fertile Crescent in particular is there is like a tension that feels a lot more kind of terrifying when I'm playing this game compared to, say, go back to StarCraft again. It's like, okay, spawn more overlords. I'm just going to press that button. I'll be delayed a little bit on my next attack, or my build will kind of be thrown out slightly. Whereas here, it's like when you start kind of having food fall apart, there's some real warning signs that start to kick in. How did you go about that process of trying to make like loss of food feel meaningful while playing this game? And what were some of the challenges in sort of designing that?
So the starvation mechanic, I would say, is the most controversial aspect of the game, because it's so harsh, and a lot of the game is kind of developed very iteratively. So we've built it step by step, very carefully and slowly over a long time. And there has been some feedback that, I hate to just die. There's no coming back. Even with the warning signs. But I think we do find that more people than not do appreciate that it's harsh. And for the moment, that's why we're keeping it as it is. So that aspect has actually just been a lot of playtesting, and then we don't have too many arguments for changing it as for now. We'll see when more and more players get their hands on the game if people will complain, but so far it's an aspect that people enjoy about the game.
And it's really interesting because you've tapped into an area that I'm fascinated about, which is like, how does a small indie team do balance and changes in systems in complex games such as an RTS, where there are so many different sort of systemic layers at work? And then you're thinking about balance not just from like a mechanical perspective of how easy is this to pick up and play or understand, or how can it be broken to then say multiplayer balance and then a horde mode balance as well. So you've got a couple of different gameplay modes here, and I'm wondering, how has that process of playtesting gone so far, and how will it change now that you're in early access?
Yeah, so making games is hard already. So and making an RTS is not an easy genre, to be totally honest. As you say, there's a lot of systems working together. It's hard to balance. So our strategy was being really patient. We didn't focus on content until we felt ready. So for years and years and years, we only focused on the core gameplay loop, just to make sure that it's fun, the pacing is right, there's meaningful choice, there's not one particular strategy that always wins, etc. So it's just been like a really slow kind of grinding this core gameplay loop for a long time. I don't know how else I can explain it, but we've been really patient. And then, because we're going to release it early access, we had to have some content, so we started, making the skirmish and horde mode, etc. And now we're getting more and more confident that the core gameplay loop is good and people like it, and it's fun, and we still enjoy it ourselves playing multiplayer even after playing it for so long. So now the focus is more on content, but we still have a lot of emphasis on making sure we keep the game as bug-free as we can, and also tap into a lot of the suggestions that come from the community. So we've always been really trying to listen to our community and what they want, but also at the same time we have a very strong vision about the game. So if something doesn't really fit with that vision, we might filter it out. But I would say 80 to 90% of the feedback we get, we really carefully consider, and most of it gets added to the game.
I'm curious about that sort of gameplay loop that you were describing. Did you have an aha moment in those first few years where you were kind of designing it and something just clicked and you were like, that's the thing that this needs to be about? Or was it a much more kind of slower process?
I wish there were aha moments, but I can't. Maybe when we added multiplayer, and I don't know if it was just fun to play multiplayer, like that was a cool feature to have been able to implement, because we thought that was going to be challenging. But yeah, it was cool playing multiplayer, but I don't think there was any like mechanic that was an aha moment. I think it's just a very gradual process where things get better and better over time. I would say every single bug or every single feature I put in, I'm like, oh, this game is so much better than last update. It's gonna be so good. Everyone's gonna love this. And then we upload it, and the next day I'm like, oh man, no, it's not good enough. No, we have to do this. We have to fix this. We have to, like, there's always something that we want to add. So if there's any aha moments, they don't last for very long.
It was actually an aha moment for me, I think, because I joined, I guess you'd been working on it for like 6 months or 3 months or something before I came on. And all of these ideas were kind of still in your head a little bit. And then when, I forget, like if it was through a conversation or if it was just me like experiencing the stuff that you'd put in already, where I was like, oh wow, like the food and the soil fertility and everything kind of lined up in a way, and I was like, oh, this is all, like they all talk to each other. So that I definitely had an aha moment at some point where I kind of got on board.
I'm kind of curious, Anders. Tell me a bit about like your work on the project. Have you done much kind of sound work for this particular project, and what were some of the challenges in on your end?
Well, RTS sound is hard, I think, because it's always like there's like how much detail do you want? How much do you want to like kind of zoom in? And we're coming out in the wake of Age of Empires 4, which is very detailed and very like real and tangible in how it sounds, and you can zoom in and you can almost like hear the different villagers breathe as you like zoom in on them, and we kind of didn't want that. We were pretty. I had a lot of experience with Age of Empires 1 and 2 from when I was a kid, and one of the things that kind of annoyed me with those games was that there's too many sounds. So everything has its own sound, and and the original design goal, the sound wise for TFC, was to kind of simplify that a little bit. And I think we've kind of overshot. I mean, meaning it's already too complicated in terms of what sounds it has, and so I think there's an argument for scaling some of that stuff back. Outside of that, I had made a silly limitation for myself where I was gonna design all of the sounds of villagers interacting on the map with a specific synthesizer, so they're all done on that synthesizer, and I'm not sure it was I think there's room to improve there as well.
Because it's interesting when the way you describe it, it's almost like a process of kind of abstracting what these sounds will be. It's like it's more abstract than, say, I guess the literal approach of the most recent Age of Empires, where everything sort of clangs or has heaviness or feels like the actual materials that are being interacted with. Is there a freedom that comes with being like, okay, I'm going to find a cool synth sound to kind of represent these textural elements that these villagers might make, as opposed to like I don't know, getting some knives out and smacking them against like kettles and stuff to kind of make the sounds of clashing swords and various other things?
I mean, it's 100% self-indulgent. I'm a big synth head, and so I just wanted an excuse to mess around with the synths, and that kind of, I mean, I think it, at least as an experiment, it worked out. It's not, yeah, because it's all self-indulgence, really. I think that's the long and short of it.
One thing that interests me was that there is multiplayer in this game. When I think about multiplayer systems and indie games, I tend to think that they can be a scary amount of work and code and development. And I'm kind of curious about what some of the trials were with setting up multiplayer for a game like this, and how it went, because you mentioned it wasn't as hard as you thought it might be. Is that kind of how it ended up?
Yeah, so when I was into developing educational games, one of the games I worked on was actually kind of like a 2D MMO for classroom use. It's still playable in Norway, has a fair bit of users. So I only implemented the client side for that game, but I worked with the server programmers and the backend. So I had some insight into how to do that, and I just knew that we had to have multiplayer for this game, because we just had this inch that this gut instinct that this game would be fun to play against other players. So, and then we had a community vote early on, very early on itch.io. We had like 30 or 40 community members, and we just had a vote, should we focus on single player or multiplayer? And I think multiplayer won by 1 vote or 2 votes or something. And we were just like, okay, let's just run by it. And we started developing the multiplayer. I would say it took 2 or 3 months to get it up. But it did, like, very simple, didn't have team games or spectator mode or anything that we have now. But it was just, if we could get that in early, we knew we would be able to launch a multiplayer, because I've seen it done the other way around, where you develop the single player and then adding the multiplayer infrastructure on top of that can be a huge amount of work. But now everything is written from the ground up to be easily added to multiplayer. So for example, a Skirmish Ai, which is only in single player now, in 10 minutes I was able to just mash up something just to test, and Anders was able to play against the Skirmish Ai, and I was able to spectate it because all the code is kind of there. Of course, we can't just add it in, because we need the UI to add the computer, set up the teams and all that stuff. So there's a little bit of work around it, but just setting up the basic is pretty quick because we have that infrastructure. That was always our goal.
That's really impressive, I have to say. And it's interesting to hear about how, like, going with multiplayer is the main focus, or like on the bedrock of the game, has just made it so much easier for you in terms of being able to continue to add to that, rather than so kind of, I guess, translating a single player game into multiplayer after, which as you've described probably is a lot of work. So
yeah, I think if you have something you can play with multiplayer, I think it's easier to make some single player content for that, because you have a game that's competitive, you can play against someone, so there's already some challenge in the game. And so when you take it to single player, what you have to do, which is of course not easy either, then we're going into the territory of adding a Skirmish Ai, which is I would say is much more difficult than adding the multiplayer. So Skirmish Ai throughout this whole development was definitely what really scared me, because I don't know how many developers they had to do just AI for StarCraft. I just, like, how many man hours they spent, I don't know, but I just had the impression it was a really big task. So and also I know a lot of players don't want AI that cheats. So you can't just like give them double food or whatever. They have to like kind of play like a real player. So I think as the single player was in a way more daunting to implement than the multiplayer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wanted to ask you about that too, because when I think of single player Skirmish Ai and RTS, I do feel like one of the first things that people gripe about is like when they just get infinite resources or half build time or whatever, and that's how difficulty is created.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine it's a real difficult challenge to kind of figure out how to script AI that plays like a person and uses a variety of different strategies that can't be exploited. repeatedly by players or
Yeah.
learn to cheat around.
Yeah.
I imagine early access will be a process of kind of weeding out some of those moments too.
Yeah. But we have an advantage in that the game, the map generation is pretty dynamic, and there's no preset maps. So what happens is players can learn how to play a particular map, and then the AI at some point, knows the map so well, and then you can surpass the AI by kind of learning the quirks of the map. But in the Fertile Crescent, the maps, it's not just a lump of trees there and a lump of trees here. It's all pretty spread, and with the tile fertility, it's all kind of spread. So the AI, which I was happy about, actually does a pretty good job. And of course, our most pro players who played for a while, they can beat the AI pretty easily because they know some strategies that work well. But actually, our biggest problem is that the AI is too good. So I had to, before release, we thought that was the case, but we haven't tested on enough new players, unfortunately. We focused on the good players because we thought that would be the issue, right? So I thought, okay, for beginner, we'll do. They produce villagers 50% slower. They don't attack with so many. They never flee. So when they attack, they just waste all their units. Like kind of quite a bit of handicaps. But the problem is they still make pretty good decisions. So for new players who don't really know how to play, maybe they think it's Age of Empires and they just try to play it like another RTS, and then they just starve and they die. So actually, one of the main feedbacks so far is that the AI is too good and we need to tone it down for beginners.
A good problem to have, I think.
Yes, I was pretty surprised. I thought AI would be a big issue, but it's actually very few people complain that it's not good enough, and when they beat it, they're happy. So for now, the AI is doing a good job, but of course we have lots of ideas of for how to improve it.
It's interesting when you describe the map system in this game, because I think it only clicked to me when you were talking about the AI there. Then a lot of RTS games traditionally, you'll have build orders that are created specifically for a specific map. You'll have entire strategies that come out from that entire process of like what is happening on this one map. So when you randomize maps like that, it kind of changes the entire process of how you strategize in a game like this. It becomes less about having like a perfect optimized plan and build order, and almost kind of more like approaching, say, like a roguelike run with, say, Spelunky is a good example of like, I kind of know how all these systems work and interplay with each other. I've now got to really figure out what's around me and make it work to the best that I can, which sort of takes me back to that sort of 4X sort of gameplay of like a Civilization, where you kind of get dumped into a generated map and you have to kind of strategize, except this isn't an RTS, which I find really fascinating to kind of see how that interplay comes out together. One other thing I wanted to ask you about was like when we talk about gamifying concepts in an RTS is, and this is particularly a thing that comes up in 4X games and any sort of like historical strategy game, is like how you create a system that defines a civilization evolving over time. And you've got a knowledge system in this game that sort of does that sort of thing. So tell me a little bit about the knowledge system in the Fertile Crescent and how you ended up designing that.
Our first experiment was having a totally flat technology tree. You could access any technology right off the bat. The idea was you can play however you want, right? Any strategy. Of course, totally flat doesn't work. There's going to be some techs that are obviously much better to just do right away. And also, so for different reasons, it makes sense to have a little bit of, like you have the beginning ones and then you have more advanced ones. But so far, we've only limited that to 2 tires. So it's the starting ones. And then you make palace and then you get the rest. So it's still pretty simple. So one thing that I wanted to change is that in a lot of RTS games for new players, all the techs are in different buildings, and you have to learn, okay, that tech is in that building, that tech is in that building. So we do have equipment in the furnace, but besides that, we wanted to have all the technologies in one place, so it's really easy to see what have I teched, what can I take, what can I not afford to take, etc., etc. I don't have to like remember the 6 different buildings and look for the tech and see if I can afford it and remember what it costed, etc., etc. So it's a little bit like part of the streamlining process. And yeah, so 1, streamlining, 2, make it so it's more open how you play the game.
So that's the Fertile Crescent by Wheeled Interactive. You can find out more information by checking them out on Steam. You can actually look up the Fertile Crescent there. You can find their game on early access, and there's even a link to their own Discord. So you can join the Fertile Crescent community and learn maybe some build strategies, how to play this game better, how not to starve. You can also follow the team on @TFC_game_RTS on Twitter. Thank you again, Anders and André, for being part of Lightmap and sharing your project with us today.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Sifter is produced by Nicholas Kennedy, Fiona Bartholomaeus, Daniel Ang, me, Adam Christou, as well. Plus, Mitch Lowe is our senior producer, and Gianni Giovanni is our executive producer. Thanks to Omny Studio for their support of Sifter's 3 podcasts. You can find links and everything we talked about on our website, which is at sifter.com.au. Read about some other games that we've been playing and some of the guests that we've featured across our various podcasts. You can also join the Sifter community. If you enjoyed this, you can share your creativity, talk about the games that you're playing on our server. You can also laugh at my Final Fantasy XIV glams and outfits, which I keep posting in our games channel. No one cares about them except for me. Visit sifter.com.au/Discord to get there at sifter.com.au/Discord. You can share the show. It is the first and only free thing that you can do to support us. Word of mouth is really important for indie podcasts like us, so let your friends know if you enjoyed listening to this show. Send them a link or rate this on your favorite podcast platform of choice. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us, and see you on the next episode of Lightmap.